And you've also committed to getting fully 40% of energy generation from renewables by 2030. Now, that's a period in which energy is going to double in use. How the hell do you square that difficult circle?
Now, Dominic, I'll just correct 3 or 4 things. Yes, we are hoping to cut down the carbon intensity per unit of GDP by about 33 to 35%. And we are well on track. We'll manage that without any hiccups on that. Our target is to have 40% of our installed capacity from renewables. It's not as if 40% of the energy generated will be renewable. Obviously, the installed capacity in renewable does not give you the same amount of power as a thermal plant does. So maybe in terms of energy generated, it may be a little less. As regards getting there by 2030, I don't think the requirement of energy will double by 2030. I think it will more like triple. It's going to be much more than that. And we are at about 1.1 trillion units. My own senses will be upward of 3.5 trillion units by 2030, for which we are on the path to both ensure that the carbon intensity is down by 30-35% per unit of GDP, but more importantly, our effort is to, whatever are the energy sources that we are using or we will continue to use, to see what we can do to use them more efficiently and ensure that we reduce the carbon emissions from these sources also. For example, I'm in a dialogue with MIT. We're looking at clean coal technologies with them. I'm working with a few IIT engineers to see how we can not just do carbon capture, because storage is still a question mark, but carbon capture and its reuse into an economically viable alternate product. So we are trying to address all these issues in a more holistic fashion, keeping in mind affordability of power, which is very crucial for a country like India.
Now, carbon intensity is going to fall anyway as the economy develops. What do you see as the difference between what would have been a natural path for that improvement in intensity and the measures that the government would take?
I don't think it would have naturally reduced for 2 reasons. One, India is embarking on a massive Make in India program, which will hopefully take the share of manufacturing up in the economy. The carbon intensity falls naturally in countries where the services sector is taking over and manufacturing is falling. So if you look at China in the last 30 years, carbon intensity increased significantly as they increased their manufacturing base. And India is at that cusp where China was in 1979. Before it embarked on this 3 decades of double-digit growth, largely powered by coal-based thermal power plants, which gave them affordable, very low-cost energy, which helped them then meet the aspirations of their people as well as meet the demands of low-cost manufacturing base, which gave products to all of your countries. So really what the West did was only transfer your own carbon intensity, or the pollution which otherwise would have happened in the West got transferred to China over the last 30 years as the manufacturing base shifted.
I grant you that, and that's evidence that climate change is very much a global issue and a large responsibility for the West too. But if, as you say, and I agree with you, that India is at the cusp where China was in 1979, the world surely can't wait for as long as it did for China to commit to hard carbon emissions cuts, targets. Can't wait for India to take that long. When will your government commit to hard targets?
India has its own development imperatives, and I'm sure you will not mind if I want to take 40% of my people out of very low cost, low incomes or poverty levels into a more developed state. I'm sure you'll not grudge me if I want to meet the food needs of nearly 30-40% of our people who sleep hungry at night. So there are certain development imperatives. There are imperatives to meet the aspirations of 1 billion people. We have to create jobs for them. We have to develop our infrastructure, all of which is only possible on the back of low-cost power. Now, the world cannot wait, but the world is responsible for this problem, and they're not doing anything about it. I wish the Economist would highlight the fact that nearly 39% of the carbon emissions continue to come from China and America, whereas India contributes less than 5%, maybe 4% of that emission, supporting 17% of the world's population.
When you say the world is doing nothing about it, does that mean you don't believe in the commitments that President Obama and President...
Well, so far we haven't seen anything credible. We haven't seen anything credible on the ground on any of these commitments.
Well, I mean, there are certainly doubts about whether Congress could ratify the U.S. joining the Paris Agreement, but America has made hard commitments. So has China.
Congress has still not ratified it. They've taken a route which they believe will survive the test of time, that the presidential assent.
But as a kind of Lovin, isn't a threesome better than two? Where's India in this?
Well, we are examining all aspects of it. We have to be sure what will be its impact on our people. And we have yet to see what the world is going to do in terms of their active efforts, or their affirmative action, which has been often promised, but has yet to find action on the ground.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned India's poor, and we care about the issue of bringing nutrition, education, and electricity to those who are currently excluded. 80 million or so Indian households currently lack electricity.
About 50 million.
50 million now. Why so many, and what's the route?
Well, that's the development backlog that I was talking about.
Yeah.
We've had several decades where large numbers of people have remained outside the electricity infrastructure. The Prime Minister has embarked on this massive program to take electricity to every home in this country by 2022. On a personal note, I'm trying to see if we can advance that to 2019, do it 3 years ahead of schedule, because I actually feel very guilty, Dominic, when I see all these glittering lights all across the cities and prominent places. And on the other hand, when I go to the villages, right outside the thermal plants or the places where solar parks are coming up, or the coal mines, and I find homes 100 meters beyond the generating plant without electricity, it pains me. Well, and that's why we're trying to take that up on a mission.
Let's talk in a minute about the potential for mini grids, but why aren't the big distribution companies extending their grids to these places that don't have power now?
They are. It's of course a huge country.
What are the obstacles to them doing it faster?
Obviously, capital is one obstacle. Another major obstacle would be taking the power to those very remote villages which are on top of mountains, sometimes in dense forests, sometimes very few homes in a hamlet situated at a long distance. So they are working through part of it through an off-grid solution, but majorly through the grid, because most people would like to be connected to the grid finally. So we are working through a solution that, selecting the imperatives of each particular hamlet or village or set of homes, we decide what will be the most suitable, and we report all of that in an app for the world to know what progress is being made, both on decentralized and the grid-connected power.
So tell us about the state-level debts of the distribution companies and their losses, and how severe an obstacle this is, and what progress you've made in resolving this indebtedness.
Well, Dominic, that was clearly an obstacle that I inherited. I remember when I became minister, the states put together were losing about $10 billion every year. Not all states, but the 7 or 8 states which were in losses. The discoms were in losses. And cumulatively, they had about $65 billion of debt, which was really not sustainable, because they did not get enough revenues to really fund this debt. It was at this point that we went into extensive stakeholder consultations, and I'm happy to tell you that the Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana, Uday, innovates or brings in financial innovation into the way the distribution companies were being run. It also provides for a huge amount of operational efficiencies, a lot of it on the back of technology, which we hope to introduce in the next 3 or 4 years across India. And my own sense is that, all these losses are going to show a falling trajectory, so that by 2019 or latest by 2020, no state power distribution company will report a loss. They will all be making profits. Point one. Point two, the debt, this unsustainable debt is largely being taken over by the state government. At the end of the day, these were 100% state government-owned companies. So it was like a holding company and a subsidiary. And the subsidiary debt was never being recognized as such. Finally, the states have accepted that, yes, this subsidiary debt is the responsibility of the holding company. And therefore, it's being pushed into the holding company so that these subsidiaries on their own can then serve the people better. Simultaneously, over the next 3 years, we are working on improving the operational efficiencies and capturing data to know exactly where the fault lines in the system are, so that we can address those fault lines. And Uday also has a hard budget constraint, so that post 2019-20, if any state distribution company makes a loss, nobody is going to finance it. No bank, no financial institution. The state will have to take it in their books, or will have to guarantee any bonds that are issued to finance such losses.
And during this interim period, and possibly beyond it, even when the distribution companies are in better shape, what does the government need to do in terms of encouraging investment in generation, including foreign investment? Because they say, well, there's just too big off-taker risk. You know, the biggest takers of our power are going to be the distribution companies, and they're not paying.
Well, this is, again, a situation that continues because we have not provided additional funds. My own belief is that unless you stop funding these losses, they're never going to stop. The losses will never stop. This is the first time a government has said, so far and no further. And I think the states are reorienting themselves to understanding that they have to live within these means. They have to work within the funds available and the revenues that they collect from the consumers. For the interim, there will be a short period where possibly there may be some delays. I'm told 3 or 4 states, there are delays in paying the power producers. Other than that, by and large in the country, it's not as if across the country the situation is normal. When you have power generators sitting in this room also, there would be having a problem in some states. But by and large, the 2 things are assured. A, it never turns into a bad debt because the state and the state discoms are known to have honored all their commitments. B, it may have got delayed, but more often than not, even the delay is compensated by interest. But going forward, as the situation strengthens, the discoms stop making these losses, my own feeling is that they will realize that it's better to pay on time and get lower prices than keep the uncertainty hanging, which results in higher procurement costs.
And my last question on this is, what is the power of the national government to get the states to behave correctly, the state energy boards to be, behaving in the right way? I mean, it's a state problem. What can you do to make sure that they sort it out?
Well, my own approach, Dominic, has been one of consensus building and working together with the states. With due respect, it's a federal structure. We can't impinge on their sovereign rights as a state. And I found this to be very successful so far. So more than my rights over the states to be able to impose what I want to do, I found a more persuasive agenda has worked well. After all, Uday also was a voluntary scheme. It was not mandatory. And we have a situation that barring 1 or 2 states, almost every other state in the country is already on board. There's 1 or 2 at an advanced stage of discussions and will probably shortly come on board. So our own sense is the national government indirectly has an ability to ensure that they come on track. Things like the amount of power that they get from the central utilities or the supply of raw materials, the funding that they get for several promotional programs. Like we have a rural electrification program underway. We have a program to upgrade the city infrastructure underway. All of these programs together are going to help the states get about $20 billion to upgrade their infrastructure. Now, that's a funding that the center can use to cajole states to perform better, to manage their DISCOM finances better. Also, the government banks are now becoming more demanding in terms of performance of the DISCOMs. That will also encourage states to ensure that their distribution companies run well. And at the national level, we are trying to support the states through technology, helping them, A, be more transparent. And my own belief is that transparency helps the people monitor the performance, both of the government of India and the state governments. And that transparency is the innovation that we've been able to bring in the power sector.
Mini grids and distributed power, what's the scope, what's the potential, and well, also what's holding it back? I mean, what are the hurdles? Are they to do with financing, with revenue collection? How can you ensure that mini grid investment is protected in the event of a grid extension by the big boys?
As regards the last question, because that's the basic reason why these grids didn't work in India. I addressed that within the first few months of my becoming a minister. So in the tariff policy that we have revised, we have brought in a clause that whenever the grid reaches any place where there's a mini grid in operation, the grid will compulsorily take the power from that mini grid.
So the investment is secure?
They are secure for the long
run. I see, okay.
So that has been taken care of in the tariff policy. It's now compulsory.
Is it working?
Well, so far we don't have too many mini grids standalone. They'll now start coming in, and once they come in, and it has to work because it's a mandatory thing. The state regulator is bound to ensure that the power is purchased into the grid, just like net metering. But as regards your first question, why it's not working, I think the important thing is people want 24 hours power. People are not looking for power for 6 or 8 hours in the day when the sun comes out, or during the times when there's good wind, or when there's good water and get hydropower. They're looking for 24/7 power. And that base load in India still comes out of coal-based thermal plants. And for that 24-hour power to be available, the mini grid has only one option as I know it today. If Economist can give me a newer option, I'll be the most delighted guy coming to your conference. But as things stand today, battery storage is the only other way to give 24-hour power. And battery storage is so phenomenally expensive today. Cheaper than what it was yesterday. Hopefully will get cheaper going forward. But as things stand today, the people of India cannot afford the cost that battery storage entails to be able to buy 24/7 power through the off-grid solution. And I've been at pains talking to policymakers from the developed world who often come and sermonize about off-grid solutions and suggest that, no, India should just stop all the coal plants and go renewable. And in every meeting I say, great, I'm happy to do that. Give me an affordable solution which ensures 24/7 power to my people. And I'm happy to shut down all my coal-based plants today. I go out and I shut them down. But to date, it's only sermons that I've received, but no credible technological option as yet.
Now, feed-in tariffs versus auctions. Now, you may tell me never to believe an economist, but economists say that auctions is a much more efficient way to raise money and to raise investment. And at the moment, feed-in tariffs are the case for solar, is that right? And auctions for wind?
No, it's the other way around.
Other way around.
It's auctions for solar, and they benefited very immensely because of that.
So what about auctions for wind then?
It's on the way. It's on the anvil. In fact, I've just come in from a meeting where I was telling my officers to speed that up.
And when is it likely to change?
It's like this, that over the years, the wind people were so used to the feed-in tariffs that they were resisting it on the ground that it's distributed all across small units, it won't work. Whereas I realized that the pricing that you get out of any of these feed-in tariffs is never going to be the most optimal pricing. Fortunately, the success of these solar auctions has brought solar prices down by about 40% in the last 12 to 17 months. That has become now the benchmark for wind. So wind has suddenly started facing the heat of solar, and their pricing is becoming unviable. So now they're coming back to me and are ready and willing to go in for the auctions.
Thank you. We have time, Minister, if you'll take a couple of questions for comment from the floor. Brief, please. We have only a little time. You, sir, and you. So only time for two, and we'll take both questions at the same time for the Minister. Please keep your questions brief.
A pleasure to hear you speak. You're on top of the situation of the whole country's power situation, and it gives us a lot of confidence that things will work out well under your watch. One of the things which you achieved is the cleanliness in which the coal was sold. Coal auctions were done, but there is a flip side to that. Apparently, the coal auction was priced so high while the exchequer got benefited. The cost of producing power has gotten lopsided. Eventually, somebody has to pay for it, and it will end up being the end user. But at the moment, the whole new projects which came up have been stalled because just the economics isn't working out. While the benefit happened, but there's something which is not worked out.
Question, I'll respond.
Let's just take one more question now. We've only got time for one. The gentleman in the speaker's table here.
Hi, my name is Avinash, and we are running a startup in New Delhi based on wearables, but this is regarding energy, because this is one of a sector which I personally think will be, will be revolutionized once we start contributing to it, as in real sense. So, like in my college days, I made some project that could increase efficiency, but at the end of the day, those ideas are not commercially viable if I go into it as a business. So how should I actually use those ideas and my research and development to benefit, at the end? Because I don't have the capacity to do that on a bigger scale, but at the same time, I don't want it to die. Yeah.
Sure. To answer the first gentleman's question, I didn't set the auction price at all. It was a free and frank and transparent and open auction, and everybody was free to bid who wanted the coal. I never asked them to bid a particular price, more or less or even more. It's the bidders, and the Economist and most of the people in this room are known to suggest that government should reform, privatize, get out of business and let people do on their own. That's exactly what I did. I didn't interfere in the pricing. I let all these smart people in the private sector bid for that coal. And I'm sure they are so smart that they must have bid the right price. Right? I never made one call to anybody bid at a particular price. Now those smart people have bid for that coal, they pay for that coal. I think it's a fair deal. You can't have a deal where the private sector is smart while they make money, and they're not smart, and it's my duty to bail them out when they lose money. Point one. And point two, in terms of power, most of the larger price auctions went for the non-power sector. And that's all working fine. In power, all I'd said is that, look, you bid for the coal, and you'll not be allowed to pass on that cost to the power cost. So people should have bid sensibly. I don't understand what was the objective of bidding such ridiculous values that at one point it became zero, and then they offered to pay for the coal that they used to produce power. Especially when I had made it clear you can't use more than 15% for merchant power. So I think the Economist really needs to do a study about how smart really the private sector is and how smart the government is. As to the young man's question, gentlemen, I must share with you an insight that the Prime Minister gave me just when I had become a minister. And I shared it in an earlier conference like this, where somebody asked me, what is your budget for research and development? And I said, I have no budget. And the audience was stunned. They thought that this guy is crazy. He doesn't want to do R&D. And the reason I said that was there's no limit to what we want to do in terms of R&D. The Prime Minister wants India to lead the world rather than follow the world in everything. Why do you think I'm talking to MIT to get clean coal technology? I'm already doing it with Australia. I'm working with the United Kingdom to see how we can make our grids smarter. So idea is that we engage with partners who have better technologies, who can help us innovate and work better. And I would urge you also to come forward with your suggestions. In fact, in the next 1 month or so, we're going to have an open house kind of program in Gurgaon at one of our technology institutes, where we're going to invite people from across India to come and demonstrate their technologies, their innovations, their ideas. And we're going to have experts of all hues sit there, assess that, and take forward whatever good ideas come in. And we are happy to support any innovation that you can come up with on that score.
Will you be happy to receive journalists for this gathering as well, since we would have to be added?
By the way, Dominic, you still you don't know much about what's happening here in India, but in terms of the power sector, everything you want to know is on your mobile. We have an app for almost every data that a common man would be interested in. If you download that app, middle of the night sitting in Washington or London or wherever you are now, you can know exactly how many LED bulbs, how much carbon dioxide saving, emission saving, how much avoided capacity, how much energy saved, how much consumer bills saved, how many villages electrified, what's happening on the transmission lines, what's the price of power right now. As we speak, I can tell you the power price on the power exchange.
Well, it's been a theme of the day, and it certainly excites me, and that's my evening sorted out. So thank you very much indeed, Minister, and please join me in thanking Minister Goyal for a great session. And I'll hand over now to Max for the keynote address, but thank you so much.